Talk of the Trollway spotlights Mount Horeb's dynamic world of art, entertainment, hobbies, and travel. Funding for Talk of the Trollway is provided by Miller & Sons Supermarket.
In 1947, the year he contracted polio, rural historian and author Jerry Apps was 12 years old and living on his parents' farm in Wishara County, Wisconsin. He isn't sure where it came from, but despite the disease, he spent time as a softball pitcher, farmer, pickle crew chief, ROTC cadet, fire escape painter, soldier, cranberry raker, writer, and county 4-H agent, a list that only scratches the surface. He recently published Limping Through Life, a memoir of how the disease affected him, and he is the subject of this episode of Talk of the Trollway. I'm your host, Gary Schutz.
I had polio when I was 12. I started limping badly when I was 60. And each year after that, it's gotten a little worse. Polio affects the nerves. My right leg was paralyzed. Polio affects the nerves around my knee. And as one gets older, then the muscles that were helping to compensate for all of that begin to, well, as we get older, all of that changes. Sure. And so now I'm limping more than I was when I was 60. And there's no way out of it. So far, I'm not in a wheelchair. And a lot of my colleagues who've had polio are. How many of you know somebody that had polio? Yeah. We're the generation that knows about polio. My kids barely know about it. My grandkids have not even heard of it, unless they've dug into some of the contemporary news about Nigeria and Pakistan and Afghanistan. Those are the countries where polio is still rampant today. But my story goes something like this. In right after the war, World War II, 1945, when the veterans all came home, for whatever reason, there was a tremendous surge in the outbreak of polio across this country. And Wisconsin was not spared at all. But now my right leg wasn't working. I couldn't stand up. And my dad could not figure out what in the world was going on. I think they had a hint that I might have polio because the neighbor boy, more than a hint, the neighbor boy had died a year or two earlier of polio. And in that little community of Wild Rose, there was a lot of fear, as there was everywhere, of polio. Everything was canceled, kids couldn't get together. So it was a terrible time. Doctor told me that I would spend my life in a wheelchair when I went home from the hospital after the diagnosis. I've said that in the book, diagnosis with polio. And my dad said, we're not going to have a farm kid sitting in a wheelchair. And the story in the book about my 4-H calf and the tractor and all that stuff got me moving again. And then my coach, the guy that got me typing, was another one that really helped the psychological part of it all. And along the way, there were people always pushing, nodding, encouraging. A bunch of people made a tremendous difference in my recovery. And in this book, I give them the credit that they deserve. And the first person that I recognized as making a great difference was my father. And I did not appreciate what he was doing at the time at all. So my dad pulls on my leg trying to straighten it out because my right knee was frozen at about a 45-degree angle. And to stand up, I could only stand on my toe. And so I couldn't really stand up. And he tried to straighten my leg and he couldn't. It just hurt like the dickens. Each night, when I was disking, my dad rubbed Watkins horse liniment on my knee. And how many of you know about Watkins horse liniment? It is wonderful stuff. You can use it for horses, you can use it for cows. You could even give it to a sick chicken. I mean, it's just good for about anything that comes along on the farm, including people. If you got an ache or a sprain or a twist or something or another, rub a little horse liniment on it, according to my dad. Horse liniment and skunk's grease, I mean, what else would you need? We didn't have any Fleet Farm then. You had to depend on these things. And by the end of Well, by the end of April, I could stand up. And I was learning to walk again. When I was involved in confirmation classes at the church, my dad bought me a cheap used bike, and I rode a bicycle back and forth. That helped my leg a lot as well. Well, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I'm not so sure the confirmation class helped my leg all that much, but the riding the bike back and forth surely did. And one of the interesting things about Wild Rose High School, 100 students in all 4 grades, pretty small. There was no football, but there was baseball, and there was basketball, and track. All of the freshman boys were expected, nobody said this, but it was just the expectation, all of the freshman boys would go out for baseball. I did not, by that time, I was not telling anybody that I had polio. In my generation, you didn't tell anybody if you had something like that. You tried to keep it a secret. Pretty hard when you're limping, but I went out for baseball. The psychological therapy was provided to me by a couple of my teachers in high school, and I wasn't even aware of it. And the coach, in those days, Wild Rose High School had 100 kids in the whole school. It was a tiny little school. And the coach taught all kinds of things besides doing coaching. But he said to me, Jerry, I think that you're not going to be able to play sports, which I knew. And he said, I think you should take typewriting. I said, typewriting? Typewriting's for girls, which it was in those days. And the typewriters were manual, and you really had to work at them. And so I'm in this typewriting class, and there are all these girls. And they've got these long, skinny fingers, and I got these little short, stubby fingers. And I'm wondering, what am I doing in this class? I am going to be more worthless than I've ever been. Pretty soon, I discovered, I was milking cows by hand. We didn't have electricity on the farm. And the girls are, we're doing typing tests about every week or so. I'm smoking the girls. Their little pinkies didn't have any strength. And so they couldn't do the A. Now the semicolon, there wasn't much call for that, and nobody knew what to do with that anyway, so that didn't matter. But the A on the left hand, these were manual typers, you really had to work. And I, with my hand, milking hands, man, I was smoking them. 45 words per minute I was typing, and the girls were struggling because they couldn't get that little A to work. The other part of polio that one never gets rid of is the psychological dimensions of it. The feeling, when I was 12 years old, of feeling absolutely worthless and not being able to play basketball or baseball or do any of the things that other kids could do in high school when I started, that stayed with me forever. And what happens, and I talk to a lot of groups about polio these days, and almost to a person, those who've had polio, they tend to be overachievers, they overcompensate. Why? Because they're trying to prove to the world that they're not worthless. That's the psychological part of polio that many people don't understand. And there's something else too. When I was in my generation, as a farm kid, if you had something wrong with you, such as polio or you stuttered or whatever happened to you, the problem, people thought that not only were you incapacitated in some obvious way, but you were also mentally deficient. It was a terrible, terrible time. And so I hid it for years. My wife didn't even know I had polio when we were married. When I talk about the emotional side of polio, that's the part that you really never get rid of. That stays with you. And a lot of people don't understand that polio is more than a physical problem. It's true of many disabilities, by the way, not just polio. But that disability creates an emotional response that, for me at least, and I try to be very honest, and this is a hard book to write, I didn't want to write it. My editor insisted that I do it. I had kept all of this quiet for all these years. And my editor at the Wisconsin Historical Society Press, Kate Thompson was her name, I mentioned it in one of my other books that I had polio, that she'd seen. And she said, Jerry, you need to write the story. You need to write the whole book. And I said, I don't want to do that. For years, I've avoided really talking about it very much. And well, she asked me again, and so I did. And it was one of the more difficult books I've ever written. I teach creative writing. I've done that for 40 years. And I have many, many students who have similar kinds of difficulties, especially veterans. I have a lot of World War II veterans lately. Sure. In their 80s, very reluctant to tell their story. It's the same deal that I was going through. And I knew from them, from the writing students I worked with, how difficult this was. And all of the tears that I saw from these old guys who had never, ever said anything about what they'd done in World War II. And here I'm sitting with tears running down my face while I'm typing. It was not easy. For 20 years now, I've been writing full time. Prior to that, I was up really early. My day job was teaching at the university. So I was up at 5:30 in the morning, getting my couple of hours of writing in before I went off to work. Now I sit down at my computer at 8 o'clock. When I'm not doing this kind of stuff, I do a lot of traveling. And I'm there until noon. I may take a break in the middle for a cup of coffee. And then in the afternoon, I'm answering emails, doing research, sort of doing that sort of thing. But it's those first 4 or 5 hours in the morning, they're very important. And I keep track. I try to write 1,000 words a day when I'm writing a book. And I keep a record of that. And that keeps, I'm very compulsive. It's true. That's how the work gets done. My writing students say, well, I think I'll do some writing on vacation, or I'd get my writing done on the weekend. That doesn't work that way. You've got to get at it every day is what makes a difference. Why am I still working like a horse at age 79? Because there's a part of me that says, I am not worthless. I still have got something going. The other side of it is when the doctor says to me, keep doing it, that's why you're able to. The fact that you keep on going is why you're still going.
See, he left the university in '93, so he could write full time.
Oh,
So that's what he does, and he writes every morning from 8 until 12.
Oh, he disciplines himself as like a
Yes,
job.
he's a German.
Yeah, well, I married a German too.
Next time on Talk of the Trollway, we'll focus on Vicki France, a local photographer who captures the drama of the Driftless area in light and color.
It's beautiful.
We'll talk about her daily search for subjects and the lessons learned through a lifetime of art. I'm your host, Gary Schutz.
He writes every morning. Let's see.
A computer?
Yes.
Yeah, but he did use a typewriter.
But he started with a typewriter, yes.
Yeah, I like the part he talked about the typewriter.
Except he went to the
Yes.
meetings and I didn't.
You know, now if you keep your finger a second too long on the key.
Funding for Talk of the Trollway is provided by Miller & Sons Supermarket. Talk of the Trollway is on Facebook, where your comments and story ideas are welcome.